Well, now, the Fair Employment Practices Commission, wasn't that viewed, at least later, as kind of a forerunner of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, which was
exactly
actually written into the Constitution? I mean, how did it come to be created, and how did it function as an agency during the time you were there?
Well, it started with Harry Truman when he desegregated the armed forces. And it also started in my history when I was a young boy living in Detroit. Could have been 11 or 12. And we stopped at a gas station, and a black man came out, and my cousin in the front seat said to him, fill her up, sir. And his mother, which was a kind of an aunt-in-law of mine, said afterwards, Bobby, don't ever call a Negro sir. And I had never experienced being offended, morally offended by anything that ever happened before that. And that was the beginning of my rather strong belief in the equality of man in civil society. So
that was an eye-opening experience.
It was.
When you had a chance,
yeah,
then to be head of, the regional office for the FEPC.
Yeah,
that was really appealing to you.
It was, and it's a strain bill that appears throughout my life, subsequently with the Michigan Catholic Conference.
You obviously knew Phil Hart pretty well. You were involved with him, worked for him all during his political career here in Michigan before he went to Washington to become a U.S. Senator. Tell us a few Phil Hart stories.
He was probably the most beautiful human being in the field of politics that I have ever encountered. He had such a gentle nature that when he walked into a room or a hall, he never ventured beyond the door because he didn't want to offend anyone. Mm-hmm. He would stay by the so the purpose of his visit was never achieved. And similarly, he learned a little trick that when he would walk out of the Capitol, for example, people were so drawn to his nature, his humble nature, his gentle nature, that they would walk into the car and then they would never leave the window. So he would say to them, well, let me walk you to your car.
That's the only way he
could get away. Yeah,
that's a classic.
And another indication of this gentleness was when he was elected to the Senate but had not taken the oath of office. His headquarters were at the Willard Hotel, and he had a suite and a bedroom. And so his aides were in the bedroom, and one of them said to him, Phil, it's time for you to go out and interview one of those four ladies and make a selection.
As a secretary?
As a secretary. Yeah. He said, I won't do that. And they said, why? He says, because I'd hire every one of them.
So he was kind of a one-of-a-kind.
He was a one-of-a-kind. He was so passionate about moral questions, particularly racial equality. I remember, I think it was the Voting Rights Act of '65. Phil was one of the principal floor managers, and they obviously filibustered that act or that bill, and he had cots brought in for all the senators to sleep overnight. He earned the title of the conscience of the Senate.
Right, and he had a congressional Senate office building named after him.
Yeah, that was
today.
rare. That was rare.
That is very rare.
I have one more little memory of Phil. I don't know if you remember Frank Blackford, but he was also head of the insurance commission here under Menon. And he handed me a book of eulogies given on the Senate floor after Phil's death. And I was on my way to Escanaba for a meeting of the State Bar, summer meeting, and I read the book on the airplane. And it was full of great political rhetoric by the liberal Democrats, Edmund Muskie, George McGovern, Ted Kennedy, all praising his legislative career. And then I came to Strom Thurmond's comments, and I was just struck with his capability to see the real Phil Hart. He said, you could not be in Phil Hart's presence without feeling greater about yourself when you left him. I thought,
wow,
whoa, how much more true that was than the record that Phil had in the Senate, except for civil rights.
You know, sometimes you get the greatest tributes from people that are totally unexpected.
But it captures, here was the mortal enemy of his cause.
Right.
And he paid great respect to Strom
right,
Thurmond as a
absolutely.
human being.
Sure, absolutely. Well, let me ask you, what was the relationship between Phil Hart and G. Mennen Williams? Were they close particularly? Was it a political amalgamation that they ran together in '54? You know, for governor and lieutenant governor. Soapy obviously had already been governor for 3 two-year terms.
Yeah. Chemistry-wise, Bill, it was similar to the relationship between Phil and Janie, and Phil and Pat McNamara. They were cut out of a different cookie cutter. Mennen was just an amazing man, but Phil was extremely sensitive, could engage in great small talk. Mennen was not capable of small talk.
But he was a big kind of gregarious, backslapping, the bow tie, the square dances.
Square dance.
He'd come into a room, he wouldn't stop at the door. He'd be greeting
right
everybody all through the room.
And there's a story about that. He had his annual New Year's reception for the staff and the public, and they'd kind of mingle in together and go through the office. And more than once, Mennen would grab the hand of one of his secretaries coming through and says, good to see you again, which was his standard greeting. Good to see you again. But Mennen had a strain of incredible personal honesty and public honesty that I want to demonstrate with this story, and I can't pinpoint the year, but it was in the early 50s, running against Paul Bagwell for governor, whose slogan was, if you recall, ring the bell for Bagwell. Well, Bagwell got on television, one of the first use of advertisements, television commercials in Michigan history, and his commercial featured a pair of very beautiful shoes. These are the shoes worn by our wealthy governor.
Ooh.
And so Paul Weber and his advertising guys got together.
Now, Paul Weber was...
being his press secretary.
Mennen Williams, press
yes,
secretary.
and one of the finest in the nation,
right.
and well recognized as that, came up with a response. And the response was, another pair of shoes. Oh, and the tagline was, Paul Bagwell cannot fill these shoes.
Cannot, yeah. Perfect.
And Paul showed it to the governor, and the governor said, I'm sorry, Paul, we can't use that. Paul says, why not, Governor? Those aren't my shoes.